Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of the Empowered Psychology Podcast. My name is Christella, and I am the host and the founder of Empowered Psychology. Empowered Psychology is a community and educational platform that gives a voice to those with visible and invisible illnesses with the goal of empowering others to take control of their minds in order to overcome adversity and create their dream lives. Through education and sharing testimonies of triumph, our mission, goal, and purpose is to destroy ignorance and create wisdom. Thank you so much for tuning in and being open to empowering change, because this amazing testimony that we're going to share is truly life-changing. So today we have two amazing guests, Julieta and Patty Valdes. They are the founders of Surviving SCA Cardiac Arrest, which is a nonprofit organization that's mission is to put an end to sudden cardiac arrest and sudden cardiac death by raising awareness and teaching life-saving skills. On May 3rd, 2020, at approximately 10:50 p.m., Julieta, who was 16 at the time, went into sudden cardiac arrest while working out at home with her sister Patty. Not knowing what was happening, Patty screamed for her mom and quickly called 911. Julieta died, and her mother and sister had to watch as EMS responders worked to bring her back, while her father and brother felt helpless and frightened as they received the news while in another country. Finally, 23 minutes later, they were able to bring Julieta back to life. The next few months would consist of Julieta fighting for her life and overcoming the many adversities that come with recovering from sudden cardiac arrest, all during the COVID-19 pandemic. Through her will to live and by the grace of God, Julieta was able to recover from her near-death experience and found a passion for life through the very thing that almost killed her. Julieta, along with her sister Patty, turned their traumatizing experience into their passion and took matters into their own hands by educating themselves and now others about what sudden cardiac arrest is, its prevalence, and how to prevent it. Here next to me is an example of two survivors who did not let their pain and trauma of what they experienced take away their joy and hopes in life. I am very excited to have them here to share their story and educate us about sudden cardiac arrest. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes. So let's get into it. What was your life like before May 3rd, 2020?
So I had always been an athlete. I'll go from the very beginning. I knew I had arrhythmia since birth, but during my yearly physicals and yearly checkups at the cardiologist, they always told me that I was fine and that maybe in the future when I got older I would need some sort of surgery or medication, but never in my younger years, so we were never really worried about it, and I continued with sports. So I played competitive volleyball for around, I believe, like 10 years. Wow. And my eyes were set on going to play in college. So at the time of the pandemic, I was training for it and still in hopes that we would return to regular season. And since it was my freshman year, it was my first year on varsity at my school, so I was still very excited and adamant to keep on training. And that was all prior to my sudden cardiac arrest. So I was always an athlete all of my life. And I actually had my sudden cardiac arrest while working out as well.
Yeah, so I saw, on your website that you're actually a superstar volleyball player. Can you talk about some of your stats and stuff?
Yeah, so when I was 13, I went back to Mexico and I played for the Mexican national team for my state. And
state?
Jalisco.
Jalisco,
yeah.
Okay.
And then here I was ranked number 18th in the country for my 2023 class. So I was being recruited pretty heavily, and in the 8th grade I already had a few full ride scholarships to go to different schools. So that's why I was always very adamant and very set that volleyball was going to be in my future. But of course, life changes very unexpectedly. So now my course has kind of shifted a little bit, but volleyball was my whole life up until that point.
Wow. And you, Patty, what was your life like before May 3rd, 2020?
Well, I was a student at UT, and I was studying mechanical engineering. And I remember during the pandemic, it's like when everything got shut down, the spring break got, like longer than it was supposed to, and then eventually we all just ended up staying home. So I was just studying a lot. I remember I was doing homework up until like 2 a.m. every day. And I remember the day of May 3rd, it was a Sunday, and I got done early with homework, which was like 10 p.m.
10, yeah.
And I would normally work out after homework, so normally it would be really late. And that day, it was at 10, and that's when Julieta had already gone on a run.
Early in the morning, I had walked my dog. I ran 3 miles. I did my volleyball workout that our club provided for us. And Patty asked me to work out, and since she was then kind of early, it was kind of like a bonding time for us.
And I was surprised she said yes, because she had done so many things.
Yeah, so originally I was going up to my room to be alone.
Yeah.
So I was so very blessed that I said yes for whatever reason, and had it happen in front of Patty, who graciously reacted quickly and knew what to do.
But before that, I was just a student and working out, and that was basically all I would do. Just, work out and study.
It was just a normal day through quarantine. You're still have your eye on the prize. Yeah. And you are studying like crazy.
Yeah.
And so what happened at around 10 o'clock?
So Patty had asked me to work out, and I was originally headed to my room, so I said yes. And by my room in the upstairs area, you have a little home gym. So we were doing push-ups. And I've always been notoriously bad at push-ups. But in my midst of learning, I was struggling to do tricep push-ups. And I turned to Patty and I told her that I was struggling a little bit. But Patty has always been a really big motivator, and she was like, well, no, you just got to keep on going. You won't get better at it if you don't continue. So I did, and about 30 seconds after that, that's when I kind of knelt up. And from what Patty told me, I said, oh, God. And I fell backwards, and I hit my head against the wall that was beside me. And whenever I didn't have a reaction to that, Patty knew that something was wrong, because I'm usually a very big crybaby, or I would have made a scene of some sort. So Patty knew that something was wrong, and after that, I kind of lost track of time. I don't know if you want to take over.
I can take over.
Yes.
So that happened, and I remember her complaining about it and not feeling good. But in my head, she was working towards getting better at push-ups, because that's notoriously the thing they make you do during punishments, for a club. And she was trying to get better, so I was like, just do them on your knees. If they don't feel good, sometimes I have my off days too, just do them on your knees. I don't have off days like that now. So she got up on her knees, and she just said, oh God, and then fell sideways, in her head on the way down. And if she would have just fallen without hitting her head, I feel like I would have been like, oh, she's just being dramatic, tired or something. She's just playing. But she hit herself really hard in the head and didn't say anything. And so when I go over to check what's going on, she's like, to me, she looked like she was having a seizure. She was moving and twitching and all of this. And I've never even seen a seizure in life. So I was like, I don't know why I thought that. So I had no clue what to do. And I screamed for my mom to come up. And when my mom came up, her thought was she's not breathing, because she was also gasping for air, which now we know it's called agonal respirations, and it's when your body and your heart is not functioning right, but your brain's still active, so it's trying to send signals to your body to get air and breathe and do things. So that's what we were looking at. I thought it was a seizure. My mom thought she was having a hard time breathing. So my mom automatically thought of doing CPR, even though she has no prior training on CPR, just from movies or TV shows or something. And she told me to call 911. So I was on the phone with the paramedics, and that you can actually hear a clip of it in the video. I don't know if you saw that video.
I saw it.
So I was on the phone, and they were just I was just trying to figure out what was going on and what they were telling me, and I could just hear my mom in that little hallway, because we had a hallway and had an archway that goes into one of the rooms, and that's the archway, I guess, that she hit her head on. So she was in that little hallway, and I could just hear my mom screaming at Julieta to breathe. She was like, please breathe, breathe while she was like doing mouth to mouth and doing CPR and all of this. So thankfully my mom was screaming that, because when the paramedics called me, or like when I was on the phone and they asked me, is she breathing? I said no, because I was just hearing my mom like, breathe, breathe. But honestly, like, you looked like you were kind of breathing because of the agonal respirations, even though you weren't. And I'm glad I said you weren't, because that would have changed everything.
Yeah, because they're trained after you say that they're not breathing, they know that it's sudden cardiac arrest, so that's when they guided Patty through CPR, and
Which
Patty was able to take over.
They probably wouldn't have.
Yes.
So then they kind of told me what to do to get her all set up for me to do CPR on her. So I kind of just pushed my mom aside, and I had the phone on speakerphone next to me, and the dispatcher was such a nice guy. He was incredible. He was like guiding me through CPR, and he was counting 1, 2, 3, 4, like telling me, keeping me up in rhythm, and he was asking me to count with him, so he would know I was doing it. And I mean, there was a point where I honestly had no clue what I was doing. Like, I was like, I mean, I remember doing CPR maybe in 8th grade for health class, but like at this point I'm a sophomore in college, like I don't remember how to do it. So I remember I was doing it wrong, and I kind of knew I was doing it wrong, and I just screamed like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I just screamed at him. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and he kind of guided me through it, which was great. And I was just doing CPR while my mom went downstairs to get my sister, or to get the 911 responders and everybody into the house. And I know my mom, like, it was during the pandemic, so everybody had to like start suiting up and everything. So I know for my mom it was really stressful, like seeing everyone at the house and not be able to come up because they're having to suit up and wear like the hazmat suits and all of this because of COVID. So I remember the first person to go up was a police officer, and he wasn't masked up or anything. He just ran up, and he was in that little hallway with me. He kind of pushed me to the side and started doing CPR. And I just remember I was by your head, like rubbing your head, and I was like, please breathe, like, please breathe. Like, I was just so confused. Your lips were purple. It was super stressful. And I just remember like asking the officer, like, is she gonna be okay? And none of them would say anything. And I was like, that's not a good sign, because they fight. I mean, they don't know. So eventually all of them came up, like more police officers, EMS, all of them. And they moved her to the area, like the workout area, so they could all be around her. And this is where my memory like comes in and out, just because I blocked so much of it. I was like turning around. I was just all over the place. But all of them were surrounding her. There was a point where they put like a halo machine around her that had like a suction cup, and it was doing CPR on her. And I remember it was doing it so hard that the bottom of your body was raising up because of how hard they were pushing. And I knew, I mean, you were not okay, but I was like, they're gonna fuck her up. Like, they're messing her up right now. Like, that's a little too hard. And I mean, my mom and I were hysterical. Like, we were crying the whole time. There was a point where we had like a little stair, like 2 stairs that went into a room right next to where she was at. And we just sat there for a second, like crying. And I just saw this EMS responder pull out like a drill. And I just remember like he started doing it on your femur, like your leg. And I just screamed to my mom and I said, don't look. And like we both turned around, and apparently they drill into the leg, like the bone, and they send adrenaline through it. So that way like it can kickstart the heart, because they can't put it through a vein if there's no blood flow. Like, so yeah, I just remember hearing the drilling sound and just screaming for my mom, like, just don't look, like, turn around, don't look. And after that, there was a point, like, this is where it all comes in and out. I remember my mom being in that hallway now, like, not even looking at where you were, just on her knees praying. I kept going into closets, just screaming and crying. There was a point where my mom called my dad at some point, telling him what was happening, and my mom was so hysterical they couldn't understand her, so she passed the phone to me to let them know what was going on. But I also, like, I guess they also couldn't understand me because I was like bawling my eyes out. So I guess it was really stressful for them, because they're like don't stop doing CPR. And I was like, they're not, like, they're already here, like the EMS is already here. And like they were like, what's going on? And I was like, I don't know, nobody's answering me anything. Like, multiple times I would be like, oh, is she okay? Like, And they would just, and I was like, is she gonna be okay? And nobody would say anything. Or, oh, they also had me write your name, your date of birth on a piece of paper. And I don't know if you saw it after.
I remember coming back from the hospital and it was still there.
And it was so shaky, like it was like illegible at that point. And they were grilling at me, like asking me, does she have like long arrhythmias or short arrhythmias? And I was like, I don't know. Like my mom didn't know either. Like, it was just very stressful. And my dad on the phone, and I couldn't understand, or like he couldn't understand me. I had no answers for him. Like we were in the same page. Like I don't know. Like I'm just looking at it, but I have no clue what's going on. And there came a point. I mean, she was without a pulse for 30 minutes. So there came a point after a while that I just like, she had blood dripping out of her mouth. Because apparently when there's no blood flow, it all goes to your lungs. So when they're doing the compressions, it was like spewing out of her mouth. Like it was like going everywhere. The paramedics were covered in blood. She was like there was blood dripping out of her mouth. She was purple at this point, like she was dead. And I remember looking at her and I tell you this all the time, just looking at her and being like, there's no way she's gonna make it. Like, but there's also no way she's not gonna make it, because you never think of this happening to anybody. Like you never think about your sister dying. I'm like, there's no way she's gonna die. But also like, I mean, we've been here for 25 minutes and like I'm looking at her and I'm like, there's no way she's gonna make it, you know? So that was like an awful experience. And I know Mom and I like went into my room and I called this old friend of mine. Like we kind of like went separate ways, but she was very religious, like very, very religious. I remember I went into my room and I called her crying after not talking to her for like years. I mean, we were friends freshman year of high school, so 4 or 5 years. And I called her crying and I was like, please just pray for my sister. Like, I don't know if she's gonna make it. I don't know if she's gonna live. Like, just please pray for her. And when I walked out of that, one of the paramedics came up to me and he was like, we got a really weak pulse on your sister. Like, we're gonna take her to the ambulance, but like we don't know like what's gonna happen. And they told me that because of COVID, only my mom could go. So they're like, only your mom can go. Like, you're gonna have to stay here, all of this. And I was like, I think one of the police officers saw me and he was like, there's no way we can leave her like at home by herself. Like, I was a mess. Mm-hmm. So he was like, it's okay, I'll stay with you in the waiting room, like just come with us. So my mom and I ended up leaving the house and followed you in the ambulance in a police officer's car. And then I was just in the waiting room for so long, and I just had a bunch of family members calling us, because I guess my dad in Mexico was calling a priest that he's friends with, asking him to pray, and he was calling family members and everything. So I just had so many aunts and cousins and everybody calling me, because they weren't going to call my mom. But I was like, I don't know either, so like, I don't know who I cried to, who I didn't cry to, like, I don't even know. But I had so many people calling me, and the police officer, like, I mean, he stayed with me for like 4 hours in the waiting room until he got a call, and he was like, I have to go. But yeah, he stayed with me until then, and then I just ended up going home that night. But
yeah. So I got to the Texas Children's Hospital at the Woodlands first, mm-hmm. and because that's the one that was close to us. Mm-hmm. And there I arrested a couple more times. So whenever they realized that my heart was just not strong enough to carry me through the night and that I needed more advanced equipment, they transported me in this like special ambulance called like the Kangaroo Crew. So they transported me in that ambulance to the medical center in Houston, so to the Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, which to my luck was the #1 pediatric hospital in the nation. So we never knew this, but I was treated by the best of the best. So right when I arrived, that was at around 4 a.m. At that point, I was immediately taken to surgery to be put on ECMO, or life support, which is where I got my scar from. So it connects your heart and your lungs to this bypass machine, and it just takes the blood out of my body, oxygenates it, and then brings it back. So my heart had some time to rest, my lungs had some time to recover. So I was on that for about a week, and in a medically induced coma during that time as well. And that was truly what saved me, because without it, my heart was just not strong enough to support itself after all the trauma and the repeated shocks trying to bring me back. So if it wasn't for that machine, and they were in shortage because of the pandemic, so we were very fortunate that there was still one available, that everything worked out the way that it did.
Well, that was another thing that you mentioned that I forgot to mention, because I either did not see it, either I had my back during those times, or like just blocked it out. But they shocked you 4 times with an AED, and none of them. Maybe the 4th one worked. I don't know.
It was the 4th one.
I don't know if it worked or the adrenaline or a combination of everything, but it took them 4 AED shocks for you to come back. So
yeah.
Yeah.
But I spent about a week in a medically induced coma. Then I was kind of woken up for a couple of days, which I do not remember because I was under very heavy sedation. But then I had my ICD implanted, which is a pacemaker. It's an intracardiovascular defibrillator, which I have on the left side of my chest. And it's an internal defibrillator that will assure that we don't have to be always on our toes, and it will shock me anytime I need it. If it were to ever happen again. So it's kind of like life safety, but I will be okay and nobody has to carry an AED around me and follow me everywhere. And even if I'm at night alone or anything like that, I will always have some sort of backup. So I got that 2 days after I woke up. And then following all of that, of course, when you don't have blood flow and your body shuts down, it's not just your heart and your lungs that are affected, it's kind of the whole system. So there were several things that entailed that. So I got pancreatitis, I had blood clots in my lungs. Of course, I was in a bed for a week and kind of lost all my muscle tone, so I was learning how to walk. I had the tubes down my throat, so it was like kind of trying to talk again, all of that stuff. But the good thing that I'm very fortunate about is that if this had to happen at any time of my life, I was glad that it happened to me so young, because I got the chance to recover so quickly. And because I was an athlete, my heart was a little bit stronger, my lungs were a little bit stronger. So the recovery process was a lot easier than if I was...
your survival was due to that as well.
So everything was simplified 100 times. And even though it's the hardest thing that I ever went through in my life, I couldn't imagine doing that at 50, 60 years old, because it's very difficult. So I was very, very blessed that, if it were to happen, it happened to me at this time around the people that I knew that were going to give me CPR and that knew how to react, and around the best hospital in the world. But you did what you had to do, and I'm fine now. So you clearly did something right. Yeah. But yeah, so everything, the sequence of events, even though it was during a very difficult time, the pandemic and everything, it all worked out perfectly. So, yes, it's something very difficult to go through, but in the end, I'm very, very grateful, because not a lot of people had that outcome and that perfect chain
even
reaction.
Your cognitive function, I remember that was one thing that I remember when I was in the waiting room in the hospital. I was just hoping that you would survive it, right? I wasn't even thinking of anything else. And then at one point I was like, well, what if she's in a wheelchair? What if she does survive it, but she's in a wheelchair, she can't talk? And I always joke about this, but I was like, me having to teach her how to talk with my lisp and my accent, that's not gonna work very well for you. But no, generally, you were without oxygen for so long. You were you were dead for 30 minutes. So the fact that you're mentally and everything is perfect, and you don't have any issues with memory. Or I remember when you were first coming off your all the drugs and all the coma and everything, we were on the phone or on FaceTime, and I was showing you all the flowers and all the toys, and because they brought you teddy bears and everything that people brought to you. And in one of the flowers there was a card, and I read to you the names of who it was, and I remember being do you remember them? Do you remember who they are? And you're yeah, but you also couldn't talk very well, so I was I don't know. And I remember just asking you because we were watching Game of Thrones right before that happened, during that time. So I remember I just can't wait for you to come home so we can watch Game of Thrones. And I was do you remember we were watching Game of Thrones? And you're wait, we're watching what? And I was oh my God.
Yeah.
But that now I know she had a little bit of memory loss in that for that time period.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a time where we were all trying to
figure out.
Do you remember this? Just casually without freaking you out, but also trying to get a
I remember being asked the president what year we're in, the day, the time, everything, constantly. So definitely kept me up to date. But
yeah. That was a long answer.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. as you can see, I was just mind blown for what, like 20 minutes? Wow. Wow. I honestly am just so amazed with these two girls, Julieta and Patty. Actually, these two queens. They went through so much, and honestly, I was sitting next to a walking miracle, which is Julieta. She is a walking miracle, and I'm just mind blown at what she went through, and also how sudden cardiac arrest isn't talked about enough. But luckily, she is here. She's telling her story, and in the next episode, we will be educating you guys about what sudden cardiac arrest is and how Julieta overcame sudden cardiac arrest and conquered sudden cardiac arrest by starting her nonprofit organization with her sister called Surviving SCA. So stay tuned for part 2 and part 3 of Julieta's story, and I will see you guys in the next one.